Thank you so much for being here again with us tonight. For those of you that have been here on some or all of the last 3 evenings, it's been an amazing week together. I really can't believe we've come to our final night. The last 3 nights have been really deeply meaningful and very engaging with conversations and discussions that you all took part in. So I really appreciate that curiosity and participation. We've been inspired with presentations about ageism, about resilience. We've participated in really interesting learning breakout experiences. We've witnessed some personal stories, very interesting personal stories of reinvention. And so it's our hope across this 4 days that you'll come away with ideas and tools that will help you build some clarity and courage and optimism as you encounter and help sustain you through these challenging times, as well as to help you imagine and reimagine the beautiful opportunities of the decades ahead in your third act. And as we go through life, it becomes more and more clear, and I believe the pandemic has helped to affirm this, that the decisions we make about the actions we take in our lives need to be based on what's in our hearts and what aligns with our mission or our personal purpose and ultimately our personal values. By sifting through these, the decisions of our lives, what we do, who we do it with, how we present in the world, and how we interact in the world is really ultimately how we can realize the opportunity to contribute to others and make the world a better place. So all of that said, the first part of this evening and our entire evening really presents a topic that is one such opportunity, and that is intergenerational relationships in our families, in our communities, and in the workplace. Tonight's topic, and Ted Powell will be leading this topic and this discussion, is intergenerational alchemy and mutual mentorship. Now, it's a lot of really resonating, powerful kinds of words, but he plans on taking us through a really entertaining and interactive discussion. So without further ado, I will just let you know that you're in great hands with Ted. I'll let him introduce his panel and we'll get going.
Great. Thank you, Diana. And it's great to see everybody. As I started to see the names pop up, I realized that there are a lot of old friends and familiar faces. And I think we've got a pretty good representation from the UVA class of 1981, which means that I know there are at least a handful of people that are about my age. I'm really looking forward to having this be a very interactive discussion. We are as interested in hearing your stories as we are in telling our own stories, all to learn and grow together in terms of how to create happy, healthy, productive, intergenerational relationships, which I found actually takes a little bit of work and a little bit of awareness. So before I get into that, I do want to introduce our panelists, and we have Scott Powell here. He's one of my 3 children. Scott is 25 years old. He is a caseworker with Changing Homelessness here in Jacksonville. So he's very much on the front line of helping homeless people or people who are about to be homeless to go in another direction, particularly veterans. And then we have Katie and Nina, who live in Burlington, Vermont, and they run an organization called Healthy Living Market and Cafe, and I introduced them through a mutual friend and client a number of years ago. And I was in Boston and went up to Burlington and visited their operation and was just blown away by a number of different things that I experienced with them. One of them was the fact that this mother-daughter team was actually making this organization work, and not only work, but grow and thrive, because a lot of times family businesses run into trouble when they try to start passing businesses down from generation to generation. So I spent an entire morning with them and I said, I would love to have them participate in a panel. And there was one thing that they shared with me that I also thought was particularly remarkable when I asked them, how have you all kept your relationship healthy and productive, not only as a mother and a daughter, but also as co-business owners? And they say, we engage in lots of therapy. And and that I really resonate with that, because I happen to believe that therapy, which really links to self-awareness, is one of the most important things that we can do for ourselves. Now, we can call it something else. I think, unfortunately, our society has a stigma against it, and you don't go to therapy until you're in crisis. You don't go to therapy until you've got a real problem to deal with. And they are role models for really using the kinds of tools that you get proactively. And I think that's been an incredibly important ingredient with their success. And you'll hear more about that later. Which leads me to what really is kind of the backbone of this whole approach here. And that is something that I learned a long time ago and adopted as something that I try to live every day. And I certainly don't do it perfectly. And that is that the key to be able to have influence over your destiny, whether it's in your relationships or your career or in your third act, is really combining a high level of self-awareness with personal responsibility. And that basically means being committed to understand yourself, how you react in different situations, and to first and foremost in any relationship, take personal responsibility for the only thing that you have control over, and that is how you react and respond to what's going on around you. So that's really going to be the basis or the premise behind some of the stories that we share and some of the stories that we share with you. I first started getting interested in intergenerational work when I was confronted with a situation about 15 years ago. I do executive leadership consulting. I do a lot of group work where I walk into rooms and help open up the conversation to get teams and companies to talk about what's really going on. And I walked into this room and we started to talk about some things. And this man, I guess he was probably about 56, 57 years old, raised his hand. He said, "I'd like to say something." And I said, "Sure." And he said, "You know, the problem we have here is these damn millennials." And he started to go on this rant about how they weren't lousy work ethic, they weren't loyal to companies. I mean, all the things that we've kind of known and heard and read about. And I started to go, oh my gosh, because I looked over there and the room was mostly people in their 40s and 50s, but there were 3 millennials sitting over at a table. And I thought to myself, does this guy know that these people are sitting in this room? So I decided what I was going to do was to let him finish his rant. And then I turned to the millennials and I said, well, what do you all have to say about that? I said, how do you want to respond about that? And of course, they came roaring out with their counterpunch. And I actually purposefully sort of threw a grenade into the works to get the conversation going so that I could allow them to have the conflict. And then after that, we could sort of unpack everything and debrief it. And that's what we did. And what hit me in that particular moment was what he wasn't doing. And what he was doing was he was really just judging them. He had his particular perspective and his particular view of the world. He certainly wasn't looking at himself. And he was falling into some of the traps that we're going to talk about in a minute that we fall into when we have these kinds of generational barriers in between us. And I started to share with him, I said, every single generation has been judged by the other generation. I mean, that's kind of what we as human beings do. And that really the healthiest way to do it is to not judge it, to recognize that there are differences, and that with those differences, there are some things that one generation brings in that might be a remarkable strength, and there may be a blind spot that a generation might have. And if we look at it that way, rather than saying one generation is good and another generation is bad, that will interfere with a relationship. That's why I sometimes struggle when I hear people talking about the greatest generation. And if you challenge that these days, you can get in real trouble. But even putting that generation up above all other generations creates a bit of a barrier. So with that as a backdrop, what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a screen and a slide, and I'm also going to ask Wendy to send via the chat a PDF that I have created with these slides and talking points, because the goal here is for me just to quickly go through these to stir the pot and to get you thinking a little bit. Then we're going to tell a few stories, and then we're going to open it up to you to see what works for you and what resonates with you. So hopefully everybody will be able to download the PDF so you will have it in front of you, because I don't like to be in presenter mode too long. I much prefer to be in gallery mode. But let's first talk about some of the things that I have learned over the years can be relationship inhibitors. One of them is just perpetuating a parent-child dynamic. And that's where there is a dependency and the parent is still playing that role of wanting to guide and direct and support and help make life choices for the child. And the child also participates, even as an adult, in terms of paying too much attention to what the parent wants or what the parent expects. Another would be allowing ego-based needs to trump love and mutual respect. Now, sometimes the ego will come out from the parent's perspective in terms of, well, wow, they're making a totally different choice than mine. That doesn't feel too comfortable with me, for me. And then we'll start to try to interfere with the life choices they're making. Sometimes the younger generation's ego will come out in the form of just rebelling against any advice you get from mom or dad or the older generation as they're trying to assert themselves. And we'll talk a little bit more about where that line is between when we're being driven by ego versus being just driven by making our own personal choices. Withholding challenging feedback and honest disclosure. The most important thing that we can do is to have relationships where we do challenge each other, because we are going to trigger each other. We are going to have those moments where we, push one another's buttons. And the best way to deal with that is to learn how to go into it and engage in the conflict and resolve it. And then the judging and labeling of others, which we talked about a little bit earlier, which is also related to promoting negative generational stereotypes, which I'm not going to go into because you probably heard plenty of them. What I do want to do is just do a quick poll. And Wendy, if you could pull up the poll. And I'm going to get a little bit of feedback from you in which of these relationship inhibitors resonates with you the most? In other words, based on your experiences on either side.
Yeah, that's interesting, Ted. I was guessing that the parent-child dynamic would probably resonate with so many of us.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, that does. And it's interesting, the withholding challenging feedback and honest disclosure. And as we go into some of the storytelling, we're going to talk a little bit about some different tools and techniques in terms of how to achieve that. Good. Okay, well, we can end the poll, and then I want to go on to the next slide, which is really more oriented towards what are some things that we can do to build relationships. And one of the things that I've found, which isn't always easy as a parent or as an older generation, is to really be vulnerable about one's shortcomings and failures. I think that's one of the most important things that we can do, because when we're, as you well know, when we're vulnerable with one person, then the other person is much more likely to feel comfortable to open up to us. Right now, I think we've got a lot of stress that the younger generation has on it to strive for perfection, to get the best grades, the best jobs, go to the best schools, all of those other kinds of things. And one of the things I found as a leadership coach, that the most important quality that somebody has to have over the long-term course of their life and career is resiliency. How do you develop resiliency? You develop resiliency by failing and then learning how to pick yourself back up. And so the more that we can share our failures with the younger generation, the more that it will allow them to learn from that. And that requires listening like a trusted friend, which also means offering prescriptive advice only when asked. Okay, I'm going to say that again, only when asked. I violate this one all the time still. And I'm not sure I'm ever going to become perfect at it, but I mean, it's part of our wiring to do that. And then when I do that and get the feedback that was not helpful, we go after it and we clean it up as soon as we mess it up. And then related to that is letting go of our expectations and assumptions. So let's do a quick poll on that. And this poll is going to ask, I think, a little bit of a different question. Which relationship builder do you feel is most important to practice to build those relationships? I think we're about there. So it looks like letting go of expectations and assumptions and listening like a trusted friend are the two long poles in the tent, the ones that rise to the top. So playing off of that, I'm going to share a story, then Scott's going to share a story, and then Nina and Katie are going to share a story. And as we share the story, we're going to kind of use this as a touchstone. I guess the story that I'm going to share has to do with actually letting go of your expectations and assumptions. And this is back when Scotty was at Elon University a number of years ago. And we had kind of been nagging him a little bit about, what's your major going to be? And he was considering all of that. We were very interested in when he was going to make his decision. And I remember he came home once and he said, I've decided what I'm going to major in. He had more enthusiasm and passion and conviction than any time I had ever experienced him before. And I said, well, what are you going to major in? And he goes, I'm going to major in human services. And I immediately started to think about that, and I started to analyze it. And I said, human services, how's that going to look on the resume? I'm wondering if psychology would be a little bit better. I mean, I literally went back 30 years, 35 years to when we used to analyze what our majors were and what kind of jobs we should get. And so I started to say, well, are you sure about that? What about psychology? And then I started to go through this process of rationalizing to him what he should be doing as it relates to that particular choice. Well, we walked away from each other, and the next day he came back and he said, Dad, I just want to let you know, that really hurt me yesterday. And I still get a little emotional about that because I had no idea what I had done until he said that. And in that moment when he said that, I said, here is a kid, an adult, who for the first time in his life is making a decision from his heart based on his passion, and I rained all over it. I just felt terrible about that, and I apologized, and we talked through it, and we gave each other a hug. As he walked away, he turned to me and he goes, by the way, I'm majoring in human services. And so that was a defining moment for our relationship because it really helped me to understand how dangerous it was to hold these expectations and then offer prescriptive advice. So Scotty, what do you have to say about that?
Well, yeah, I remember that situation very clearly because it was one of the first times in my life that I've ever really had to make my own decision. And I knew they weren't going to be crazy about the choice. And so I was already building up walls and building up defenses. And I'm sure that came off that way when I broke the news to them because I knew, I intuited that there were going to be questions of, well, I don't know how marketable that's going to be. And I was right. But what I made that decision about was my ego. It was so important to me and becoming my own person and coming of age that if I even allowed there to be a conversation that I was basically giving in. And I knew the story I told myself was that if I allow this to be a conversation, then I'm going to be weak and I'm going to give in. I'm going to do what my parents want me to do because they have the power. They're the ones paying for the school and all this stuff. But so instead, what I did was I just built up these walls of like, no, I want to do this. And that's what I did. By the way, I'm going to major in human services. And so when I think back on that, it's not that I feel like I made the wrong decision. It's that I did it in such a way that built up barriers between myself and my father. And there've been other times too, where like, for example, one summer I had made a commitment to do an internship and had this, like right before I was about to leave college to come back home to do this internship, I said, wait a second, no, I want to stay at school this summer. And I called my parents and I was like, hey, like I'd really rather stay at school this summer. And I remember my dad saying something like, well, you really made a commitment to these folks. And these were folks that we knew personally too. And that was a time where I kind of begrudgingly listened. But all like these different decisions that I've made over the past, 5 or 6 years as I've kind of become an adult, it's very clear when my ego is showing up, because I'm defensive, I'm building up walls, and then I'm kind of judging my dad or my mom or whoever is kind of the authority figure back as someone who doesn't have my best interest in mind. In that case, I kind of begrudgingly agreed and came back home for the summer. And that was the right decision to make, just based off of integrity, what I committed to do. What I want to emphasize is that my ego was so entrenched in those decisions that I wasn't even allowing myself to really listen for my dad's input. And I didn't really want it either. And I'm very thankful that now, 5, 6 years later, I'm in a position where not every decision that I make is going to, make or break my own ability to be an adult. And I can actually earnestly ask my parents for advice and input, and actually want it too. I think about some of the recent decisions that I've made. I got laid off at the beginning of coronavirus, and now I'm working with homeless veterans. I'm able to consult with my parents on decisions like that, and other tough decisions like finances, because one, I've grown up, I've grown in self-awareness, and two, I know that my ego getting in the way of like, oh, this has to be my decision and I'm my own man, just isn't as important. I'm trying to make the best decisions that I can. So that's kind of my story, and I can't say that I won't ever, be resistant to my dad's input, but hopefully I can grow and just take it as it is. That's your opinion. Great. I'll file it and not be offended by it and not have to, fight against it. So that's my story.
Thank you, Scotty. Nina and Katie, we'll turn it over to you all.
I go first.
Thank you, Ted. Yeah, I'll go first. So our story is about a really personal and tough situation that we went through while we were traveling together. It was in 2013, and we traveled out to California for my cousin's wedding. During the wedding, I experienced a miscarriage at 20 weeks, and I ended up in the hospital there. My husband was back home in Vermont, and I had my mom and my brother with me in California. You can imagine it was very emotional. It was a huge surprise. I didn't even realize that could happen. So I was sort of in this state of shock, and I needed help. And my mom and I have always had a great relationship, a strong relationship. And in that situation, I really reverted back to this self that needed her to be my mom. And she really showed up for me. And I have lots of memories that I can share about that situation, but the one that I will never forget is sitting in my hospital bed. She said to me, "Nina, you can choose to be a warrior." And it was a moment where I guess I didn't ask for advice outright, but she knew I needed it. And she gave me exactly the kind of advice and help that I needed right in that moment. It wasn't judgmental. It wasn't telling me what I should do. She built me up and she showed me empathy, and I held on to that every day ever since then. Those words really got me through. And then she pushed me through an airport in a wheelchair and took me all the way home to my loving husband. And it will stand out in my mind as one of those moments where our relationship grew because we read each other well. And I know my mom has a really different, I won't say different version, but something different happened for her.
Right, and all that did happen. Yes, Nina had a really horrible miscarriage. It was a really crummy situation. And I will say that, yes, our relationship was transformed. I mean, we'd always had a great relationship. We had a lot of years of smooth sailing, and this was a gigantic bump in the road. And I learned a lot about Nina, and I learned a lot about myself, because for myself, I found myself doing things and being a way that I really never expected myself to be. I never expected to be put in that situation with one of my kids. And when I was, somewhere inside me, I found the words, Nina, you can't choose what happened to you, but you can choose to be a warrior. And in saying that, I became a warrior too. And I was a warrior for you. I just found it was sort of an out of body experience. I found myself doing things and being ways that I'd never been before. And I think it just was, as Nina said, like a transformational moment in our relationship. And from that point on, I think we've had a greater trust in each other, and we've continued to work together and grow together. And as Ted said, do a lot of therapy together. And what we've discovered is the work we do in therapy about our personal relationship, the issues are pretty much the same thing as the issues we face in business or with friends or anything else. And it's taken a lot of the stigma and worry about doing therapy away from us. And we love each other, and we're really close, and we work together every day.
Great, thank you. Beautiful story, and you know, it just represents to me, you know, that wonderful sort of dance between a mother and a daughter in a crisis, where there ends up being lots of that support, versus sometimes what I see, and I actually experienced that in my other family, where there was a crisis, and if everybody sort of let their fear get in the way, there weren't those wonderful you can choose to be a warrior kinds of support. It was more just a lot of drama. And so I think that's just a beautiful example of that. So
Can I say one more thing? Ted, can I just say one more quick thing? And that is, like, saying this in front of a group of people is a powerful thing. It reinforces everything I've learned about Nina and everything I've learned about our relationship. And I just think it's so important to speak the truth.
So would anybody like to speak their truth by either asking a question or sharing a story or an experience that you've had?
Ted and Nancy and Scott, good to see you. We were classmates and vacation together, and know the kids for a long time and so on. And they know our kids, we know their kids. And I think I go back to one of the things I did with my kids, which I was so honest with them at such a young age that I know I sacrificed some closeness to them, because I would say things to them like, when they were 10 years old, hey, be prepared for me not to be around. Suppose I drop dead. Be prepared to make your own decisions. And, you know, that time has passed for the vast majority of us. But I thought it was very intentional, and I thought it would pay off in the long run with a relationship with mature offspring, and it has. You can't redo that, but, you know, just giving people, your kids, recognition of their own volition and their own judgment at an early age, and respecting that is very powerful. And so those guys were all, you know, the three sons were all really good guys, and all very self-directed. So anyway, you know, not to pat Catherine me on the back, but, you know, I sort of looked forward and saw that and said, because I know how I was, I wanted to be self-directed.
Mhm.
So anyway, to the degree that we can do that going forward, great. The ship may have sailed in many cases, but
Well, one of the things that in some of the workshops that I do where we wander into people sharing what Carrie just talked about, is an understanding that at the end of the day, our intentions were very, very positive. There is no way that we should hold ourselves accountable to a standard of we're always going to make the right call. And even if you were close to being a perfect parent, your kids will probably need some therapeutic help at some point because of whatever it was that they took or interpreted. So to me, that's very liberating because it really helps me to realize that it's an ongoing process and journey of learning and growing and confronting. It's not just a fixed destination.
Yeah, great to see you, Scott and Ted and Nina and Mom. Just love the stories. I just wanted to follow up on something that Ted and I think Scott too mentioned about vulnerability and the importance of that. My husband and I joined a racial justice group, intergenerational racial justice group in our church, and I would say half of the people in the group are in their late 20s and early 30s, and then the rest of us are 50s, 60s, all the way up to 80 years old. People just really wanting to understand, and we all made an agreement with each other that we would respect where everyone is in this journey on racism, and it has created this trust so that my husband and I, especially, somewhat embarrassingly with these younger people who are more, I would say, woke than us on this, we've shared our failings and our fears and our awkwardness, and we are just getting such lovely feedback, not that we've asked for it at all, but just messaging from these younger folks thanking us for our honesty, and it's empowered us even in our own family to be vulnerable and feel okay with that.
I worked for 7 years with, I mean, it seems like since I was like in my 40s, everyone was younger than me. Whoever I worked with was younger than me. But I worked for about 7 years with a young woman who I'm probably 30, 35 years older than she is. And we're just very good. I was her mentor. I'm a writer and an editor, and I was her editor, and I was her mentor and her boss in a very small shop. And we just developed this relationship that has, I'm no longer at the firm, but we have this, and it was interesting to see that as that piece about the parent-child. And I was looking at that and like, when you're in a place of authority and you're so much older, it's easy to slide into that. And I think there were times in I was editor, but mom, but we just have a wonderful relationship, it's funny that I can trust her so much that I can share things with her that I don't share with anyone else. And one thing that's very different too is that I have nieces in their 30s who I've seen grow up, and they're millennials. And I hear that term and that negativity around millennials, and I don't experience them that way at all. And this young woman either. And so it's funny, I had another new colleague who was also way younger than me, and I was talking to a friend because I was having some difficulty with her. And she goes, oh, those millennials. And she went on this whole long thing. And it's very easy to start taking that on at some point. So I just think this thing about not taking on others' expectations and assumptions, is really important because it's very hard, when you have people your age who you are really peers with intellectually and everything else. And they've done a lot of reading, you know, about these generations. I mean, anyway, that's just what I wanted to offer.
No, I appreciate you sharing that, Susan, because and Diana and I talked about this as I was putting this together, and I started to think about, we could go in the direction of starting to talk about what are some of the differences between the baby boomers and the millennials, and then analyzing that. There's a ton of research out there. And then that just didn't feel right to me, because it felt like it was feeding that labeling that we do, because it's really more about how do you learn to have that kind of co-creative, trusting relationship that you did with that person that you were mentoring.
Yeah.
Because it's all about, and right now there's so much labeling that goes on in society and through mass media and social media and that sort of thing. And people aren't relating to each other to have the kind of experiences that completely trumps all of the rhetoric. Oh,
Right.
excuse me.
Can I ask a question, Ted? Because you've thought about this a lot, because one of the things that I think about a lot is this labeling, but I also think on all these topics of intergenerational challenge is there's no game book or learning experience that you're given as a parent. There are books like crazy around how to raise a toddler and how to potty train and all that stuff. But parenting your adult children, I'm sure there are books out there but there isn't a lot of common comfort and knowledge around that. And likewise, I find that we've inherited perhaps from our parents' generation this distancing and othering of different generations. You know, I don't know if you were like me, but when the parents had a party, we were supposed to be out of the room. We weren't a part of it. So I think we've inherited some of it, and then we don't know exactly. And so we're sort of all feeling it out, you know, it seems.
Or with my family, my parents, as Scotty and Nancy know, it's more along, let's show up, see what we can do to have a good time, and walk around a lot of landmines. A lot of just undiscussable issues and questions. And Carrie?
I'll chime in because, you know, it's akin to, as my dear old dad, who was born in 1921, said, every generation thinks they invented sex. Well, they did. And every generation thinks that the generation before is a problem.
That's right.
And one a quick anecdote, he was a federal narcotics agent, and he used to buy heroin from bad guys, Sicilians, who would do it undercover. And they were doing a wiretap, and they have the mobsters on there, Matty the Horse Iannello and some other people. And the old mobsters are saying, this younger generation, they don't respect nothing. You know, they do violence in their grandmother's neighborhood, et cetera, et cetera. And the other guy, who's, you know, a murderer, an extortionist, says, what can I tell you? We're in the hands of the Philistines.
My late father and I were so much more similar than I wish to acknowledge, but he died 13 years ago from cancer, and I moved home from Philadelphia. We had been at loggerheads for, I'd say, decades. He probably thought we were perfect, but we disagreed about everything. And in the final 6 months of his life, I was there 24/7, and there was this great peaceful rapprochement that I'm so grateful for. But I look back and I think of all those years where I refused to engage with him, and he was determined, and we were both so stubborn because we were both right. We knew everything. And I guess the lesson that I learned and I would want to impart to anyone and everyone at any age is, it's such an overused word, but communicate, you know, just reach out. And even if it's painful, even if it's annoying as hell, just keep the conversation going, because then they're gone and you can't have it anymore. And I just am so grateful for all of the controlling, critical, he knew everything advice that he gave me, because most of the time he was right. I look back and I'm just so grateful that he cared enough. He loved me so much that he wanted to tell me what to do.
Right.
But I don't have kids. I have dogs, so I can tell them what to do. But but the connection within families, sisters and brothers, siblings, cousins, just listen, open up your ears and listen, because it's so important.
So if I could, before we go on to the next person, because what I really resonate with what Diane is talking about, that from my own relationship with my parents, who are still alive, but they're definitely in the last lap. And as I was struggling with some conflicts within that, I heard a speech by Richard Rohr. Some of you all may have heard of him. He's a wonderful Franciscan priest. And if you ever have a chance to read his stuff or see him in action, and he has this quote that I literally have as a mantra I use all the time. When he gets into those situations where there's two battles of the need to be right, and it's basically saying to myself, I value my relationship with you over my need to be right. I value my relationship with you over my need to be right. And if you can really practice that and adopt that, then all of a sudden, there might be times you let that person be right, particularly if it's not really a big issue.
I am going next because I'm texting with my granddaughter, and I think an enormously important relationship is what happens when you skip a generation.
Yeah.
Now, there's several points I want to make. I'd like to hear some comments, but my passion is learning partnerships. And I loved hearing, was it Tara who spoke about the mentoring relationship? I want to take the opposite point of view. The relationships that I have with youngers and olders is partnering. I don't do these relationships. And frankly, I'm not interested in them. I have good relationships with very small children sometimes because I learn stuff from them. Now, what I am interested in is learning relationships. So it seems to me that a baseline of this conversation is the imperative nature of intergenerational relationships. You just can't stay in the game without them. So why wouldn't you want them? I'm involved with a project right now about collecting our stories during the time of COVID. What an amazing time this is. I'm 82, and so I was alive during World War II. I was very involved in a lot and in the women's movement, the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement. I was actually in Manhattan during 9/11. This is the most amazing time of my life. So being able to tell your story and hear other people's stories, I think is just, it couldn't be more valuable. But when I started the project, I had a lot of words. I love words, I'm sort of a word weasel. And it is only the involvement of my grandchildren, with whom I've written a book, along with a school psychologist. So I'm aware of the importance of that input. You can't even communicate. I'm laughing because my grandchildren will turn 17 in November. And I don't know whether anyone else I would love to hear more about this. They used to want to play with me all the time, and now they don't want to play with me so much, and they don't really call me as much as they used to call. And I haven't done a thing about it. I will I'll text them. I don't get texting. I do it. Why do I do it? Because if you're in France, it's helpful to speak French. So I'm really overwhelmed with appreciation for intergenerational relationships. And while I think they are fascinating in our families, I think they are equally fascinating in every aspect of our lives.
That was very inspiring, Marge. And I just want to add to that as a I call it late in life mother. I had my beautiful daughter when I was 41, the blessing of my life. And as other friends were venturing into adult children, mine was still quite young. And I just remember every single day relishing the fact that, feeling full of the inspiration that I gained, not just from her, but from her little friends, in 4, 5, 6-year-olds that have given me such faith in our future. Their passion for the planet, their passion for a more inclusive way of feeling and being in the world. So, I'm with you on that, Marge. Thank you so much for sharing.
I'm Bev, and I'll follow up on that. I am in a situation where my mentors, and we sort of seem like we're talking about mentors being somebody who is always older, but as a teacher in this time of technology where I am now having 3 computers on my desk to communicate to my students, I am leaning on anyone younger to help me and mentor me and help share with me how they're thinking about this instructional process and developing my skills in teaching 3rd graders to be able to learn in this situation. And without this younger generation, of which I am old enough to be their parents of my colleagues, I would not be able to survive. And so mentors come in all ages. I think you have to recognize that through the intergenerational communication and relationships that you have. It isn't just as being a peer or being older and having wiser. That wisdom can come in any age, just as Diana and Marge said, through the youth that you interact with, which brings in much more understanding and different perspectives because of our experience and because of our, in some ways, can be a tainted point of view to what is happening. And that connects then to the millennials. They just have a different point of view, maybe, or is our point of view not understanding what millennials or whatever other generation there is sensing and making some changes in that process for our future. And it will happen. I really think this positive change is going to come out of this. We all have to hope for that.
I think that work is such a unique opportunity for people to experience intergenerational relationships. And I think that me and my mom are unique because we're also family, but I hear a lot of you talking about like mentor protege relationships where we learn from one another, where we learn from people who are older or younger. I do think that when you open your mind in a workplace environment, there are a lot of opportunities to learn from people both older and younger than yourself. And I think that, we have this unique thing because we're also related, where you weave together like the familial confusion or like history, right, that we have together. But also this idea that, Katie started our business 35 years ago when I was 3 years old, and she's been doing it way longer than me. And even when I think that I know exactly what I'm doing, I usually don't. And she tells me.
Do I? Yeah.
When I went and visited the healthy living market, I mean, you go there and they have a lot of people who, would you say, are like 18 to 25?
Yeah.
Am I getting that?
Mhm.
And I remember as we had, long in-depth conversations over the challenges of managing that workforce, I could tell, because she's a human being, that she had frustrations around that, but I could also tell that because she's a business leader who cares, she was working through those frustrations. What would you say would be the biggest thing you've had to adjust about your personal belief and mindset to be able to come together with the mindset of that younger generation?
I think it's like I've taken on this mantra of like meet people where they are. A lot of the people who work for us, it may be their first job, right? And we have a responsibility to them to teach them how to be great employees, not only for us, but for any future job that they're going to hold after they leave our organization. And, you know, whether they fit the stereotype of the millennial or not, I have to accept them the way that they are and offer them opportunities to grow and learn about themselves, without judging them or labeling them, which I'm definitely guilty of sometimes when I'm most frustrated with all 250 of them. Yeah, I'm trying to move myself into a place where I say, like, well, they bring a lot to the table because they understand the world in a different way than I do, than Katie does, than my brother Eli, who's also a co-owner of our business, does. And like, what can they bring? And if we make our organization a place where they want to work and they want to be, how will they blossom and how will they help us grow?
Very good, wise advice. Sometimes when I see a leader being very, very frustrated, I'll say, you know, your job is to be a coach and an educator, and you know, it's just reframing it. These are so that they can adopt that
I
mindset
think
of
one of,
helping them to grow.
I think one of the reasons we have longevity with quite a few of the people that work for us who are much younger is that the message we put out is that the most important thing is that people come to work for us and grow and learn and move on to something greater and bigger. And I think that's a freedom, and they have permission to express and learn and offer suggestions. I think there's just a deep respect that we have for everyone. I mean, I always say, like, we're all just bozos on the bus, including me. We're all just struggling mightily to be human beings, and they're
I
not.
love that. I am now officially a bozo on the bus.
That's right. That comes from
Liberating.
wavy
Thank you.
gravy. We're all just bozos on the bus.
Yeah, thank you, Firesign Theater, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for Katie and Nina. You know, as a mom, and when your kids are in some kind of crisis, we haven't faced that kind of crisis that you did, but you know, I know I personally always struggled being a good ENTP. I always struggle with how, you know, how much empathy to just go with the empathy piece versus, you know, it sounds like, you know, to, you know, step up and kind of say, you need to be a warrior, or it's your opportunity. It sounds like, you know, and you can't overthink it, obviously, because you lose the opportunity. But that balance, I know I just sometimes struggle with that balance, especially with your kids, because we do try to listen to them and understand where they're coming from, and then not preach or lecture.
Right.
So it's this balance, and anyway, I just thought I would ask, you know, kind of how you knew.
Well, I think when I said you can be a warrior, I didn't mean like, get off your ass and get to work, girl. I meant you can be a spiritual warrior. You can dig deep inside and learn from this and accept this and ask for help. It was more of a deep kind of warrior.
And she knew what you meant by that then.
I think in that moment, there was so much vulnerability. There was just an opening for that in both of us.
I think that when you're in crisis, all you want is empathy. And I work with and have befriended many other lost moms or people who have experienced grief in some kind of way. And our common thread is a need for empathy, that like no one can fix your problem with words, but just to know that somebody is listening and somebody is there in whatever way you need them to be, that is the most powerful way to support. And I think that especially when you're talking about like parent-child or any kind of like different generation, different age gap.
Yeah, like millennials.
Relationship,
Yeah.
it's like that's all you can offer, right? Is I'm willing to hear you, I'm willing to listen, I'm willing to give you whatever support you need, instead of just telling you what I think you should do.
Right. I might not have all the answers, but I have I know how to generously listen.
This has been a really interesting discussion. And I think, Ted, the way you set that up, and I'm glad you put that PDF in the chat for us, and I'll send it out in an email to you guys too, in case you missed it. But, you know, I think we're all learning. And Nancy, that was a great question for Katie, because I'm thinking the same thing. It's like, how do you take that transition from the mother who wants to swoop in and fix it to the mother that needs to be there to listen? So thank you.
Of course, I always have something more to say. You know that. No, this just kind of sums up, if you have a life philosophy, mine is age is just a number. I mean, my mother told me when I was a little kid, you're an old soul. You've been around the universe multiple times. And I don't think of myself as a certain age. I don't think of myself as a certain generation. I'm just a person who talks way too much. But I just, every day I wake up and I feel so fortunate that I'm excited to wake up and go out and do what I'm going to do. And I hope I have many, many more years to do that. And I have friends of all ages. I get annoyed with millennials. I get annoyed with baby boomers. I get annoyed with everybody. I'm sure they get annoyed with me.
You're human. You're human. Okay.
They get annoyed with me. But it's truly, there's so much more. Everything connects us. We're just born in different years, but we're all the same. We're all waking up every day with the capacity and the potential to do anything.
So Ted, thank you. As we transition to the next program, is there anything you want to leave us with, or thoughts you want to prompts for us to think further about this?
No, I think I'm going to adopt the Forrest Gump. That's all I have to say about that.
Well, it has been
everybody, and to me, this is thank you, because this is what I wanted, was lots of engagement and participation and sharing of your stories and perspective. So you all really made this work from my perspective. So thank you.
And thank you, Scott, for being here and sharing your story. I love meeting you. I've heard your father's story, and it's wonderful to hear your connection with that. And Katie and Nina, I admire your beautiful relationship and your beautiful way of leading your company. So thanks for sharing that bit of your story as well. And everyone, thank you for being here. And I hope that this has been thought-provoking and affirming about your own relationships as you navigate and work through and embrace people in your lives.